guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a Q&A on the topic of living alone. I've been getting a lot of questions about living alone for a while now, and I thought I would compile all the questions I've been getting, ask more questions to you guys, and answer them on this video. So just to give you some kind of background, I have been living alone since I was 18. Before that, for 2 years I lived in boarding school, and when I turned 18 I decided that I wanted to go and live in Bombay while my parents were in another city. I didn't want to live in a hostel, or I didn't want to live with roommates because I'd already had that experience in boarding school, and I wanted to just live alone in an apartment, and my parents' apartment was there. They graciously agreed to let me live in the apartment, and since then I've been living alone. I've lived alone in Bombay, I've lived alone in Coimbatore, that's where I am right now. Only now I am living partially with my parents, so for a few days of the week they come to my house, which is actually their house. It's complicated, but basically I've been living alone since I turned 18, and I still consider myself to be living alone. So let's get to your questions. Now, the first question I always get is, how was it moving out of your parents' house for the first time? The thing for me at that time was I was going back to Bombay after living for 2 years in Ooty, and that for me was really exciting. So I don't think I gave as much thought to the fact that I was moving out of my parents' house. So I was really excited to go back to Bombay. I was really excited to be with my friends again, and so I just didn't really think about it. The second thing is that I was also raised to be very independent. My family has always given me a lot of independence, thankfully, and my dad has always raised me to be independent and do things on my own. So he always says that when I was younger, when I would come to him for help, he would always ask me, can you do that on your own? And I would think and say, yeah, I can do it on my own. And he'd say, okay, do it on your own. If you can't do something, then come to me for help. And I think that attitude of parenting that he had made me more independent. With my mom, she used to send me to buy milk and bread and eggs at a very young age, and I grew up with that independence and I learned to do everything, and that kind of helped me when I went to Bombay, because I was not fearful or anxious. But obviously there are things that you have to do for the first time. You have to order gas for the first time, you have to sometimes call a plumber or an electrician for the first time. You have to deal with things that you always thought your parents would deal with, or your parents did deal with, and you didn't really pay attention to it when they did it because, we're young, we're not really thinking about what they're doing. When you're alone, when you're living alone, you have to think about those things. Every new experience is exactly that, it's new, and so there is some level of hesitation or anxiousness when it comes to that. But I'm thankful that I had my parents to call and say, how much do you have to pay the plumber, or how much do you pay an electrician for fixing this, and just ask them questions and they would just tell me. So that was my first initial reaction to moving out of my parents' home. There was excitement, there was a little bit of anxiousness, but mostly there was excitement. The second question I get a lot is, how did it feel to be free? And I put quotes around the word free because that freedom comes with a lot of responsibility. At the end of the day, you are responsible for your life, you are responsible for the choices you make, you are responsible for your actions and the consequences to your actions. When you realize that freedom is not actually freedom, but obviously yes, you have the opportunity to explore, you have the opportunity to figure out who you are without any restrictions. And for me, just because my parents were very free with me before, I didn't feel the need to kind of rebel and do anything that I could do. But I can understand where people with strict parents are coming from when they think about freedom, because all their life they have been restricted in certain things, and when you go to another city or you go and live alone, you feel that you want to try those things. So I can understand that, but I think over time, as you live alone, you also realize that with that freedom comes a lot of responsibility, because you're in charge of your life, you don't have anyone to blame. And so yeah, that's what I learned about freedom and responsibility when I lived alone. The third common question I got was about loneliness. So I had a question that said that what happens when alone or being alone turns into loneliness. And I think people forget that when you're alone, you're alone. And it's all fun and games in the beginning, but at the end of the day, everybody has their own life. Everybody has their own families, or everybody has their own jobs and careers, or own college or work, and everybody has things to go back to when you go back home and you're alone. And that becomes sometimes a lonely state to be in. What I found, especially when I was living in Bombay where I had no family, was I needed to build a sense of community around me. For the first year that I was in Bombay, I actually didn't go to college. I was on a gap year, and that was when I needed community the most because I didn't have college to go to, or I didn't have work to go to, and so I had a lot of spare time. That is when I chose to get involved in a lot of different activities. So I had my church activities, I had a choir that I was a part of, I took up extracurricular activities with people, and thankfully I also had my group of childhood friends who were in the city. And so that sense of community was very important for me, and I think that's what all of us need to do. And if you are alone and lonely, you need to find some community to be a part of, because we often forget that as humans we are meant to be social. How much ever you might enjoy being alone, and I do enjoy being alone, I'm an introvert and I love being alone, that is my happy space, but you cannot be alone all the time, because then you feel lonely, you feel as if there's no one to listen to you, there's no one to hear you, there's no one to understand you, and no one to communicate to. Find your people and you'll not feel lonely, because when you don't have family in the same place, you need family, you need friends who are like family, and I think that's very important. The next question is also very similar to loneliness, and it's a question that says, how do you deal with the darkest and the longest nights? And I found that this question was very deep, because what we don't realize is that when you're alone with your thoughts. And most of us, because we're always surrounded with people, by people, we don't really think, we don't really have the time to think, we don't have time to dwell on our thoughts, because we're constantly surrounded by family. But when you live alone, this also happens when you live with roommates or you have a separate room, is that you're left alone with your thoughts, and our thoughts are sometimes deep and dark. And when you face those thoughts head on, especially when you're living alone, it's hard. And it's not only to do with these thoughts, there are sometimes circumstances that we are going through, and those become harder when you're alone, because you don't have people around you to support you, you don't have people to distract you, you're just stuck with your thoughts, and that's it. In those times, in those nights when you cannot call a friend, or you call a friend and they don't pick up, or you cannot really share this with family because they're going to be worried about you if you share what you're going through, I think the only thing that you can do is face your thoughts. I think that emotions and feelings and thoughts need to be faced, need to be experienced, need to wash over you sometimes, because we often resist them. We either distract ourselves from them, or we resist them, or we ignore them, and all of these things don't get us anywhere because the thoughts come back. I think one of the things that I learned when I was living alone is to just let thoughts and emotions just wash over me, to experience them and to process them and let it go. And I think that is one of the best things that I learned by being alone. When you think, when you process, you understand parts of yourself that you probably didn't understand before. And I think that is the beauty of living alone. Sometimes those deep and long nights are necessary for you to evolve as a human being, because that is when you truly understand, I'm sad, I'm unhappy, what can I change about my life? I need something more. I need some more purpose. I need some passion. What is my passion? And these are thoughts you can only have when you kind of still yourself and not distract yourself and not ignore those thoughts, but actually feel those thoughts, feel those emotions, and kind of pull them apart and see what's underneath, because what's underneath is what actually matters. To this day, I need to be alone to do that. It's very hard for me to do when I'm surrounded by people. So we went really in depth here, so let's end this video on a lighter note. So the last question I'm going to answer is the question that is very, very important for all of us, and that is, how do you manage the food? So I got a lot of questions on this, of how do you manage hunger, how do you manage food, and that is one of the things that we all miss when we're living alone, is our mom's cooking, our family's cooking, and just home cooked food. So the advice I'm going to give you is very simple, and that is, figure out out how to cook at least the basic things for yourself. There are options. You can eat out all the time, but that's expensive. You can get somebody to come home and cook for you in certain cities, so that works out well if again you can afford it and you are at home at certain points of time. Third thing that you can do is there are people who make home cooked food and pack it for you. You can do that. But finally, I think the easiest thing to do, the most cost efficient thing to do, is to figure out how to make basic things on your own, and that's what I did. I don't particularly enjoy cooking, but I can cook. So I can cook to survive, and I think that's what we all have to do. I think it's a skill that will help us for our entire life. I know that there are some people who are naturally talented at cooking, who enjoy cooking. I know some people who don't really enjoy it but are good at it. I also know some people can't even boil an egg. But there is YouTube. There are recipes online, and there are very easy recipes online which I still follow to this day, of making food in 15 minutes, and healthy, nutritious food that you can eat on a daily basis and not feel as if you're burning a hole in your pocket. So if you find yourself in that situation where you are hungry all the time, you're craving home cooked food, I think the best thing to do is to figure out how to cook certain things yourself. I think also the best thing to do is to ask your mother about your favorite recipes, and she will share it with you and learn to cook those things. Go home for the holidays, figure out how to cook your favorite food and cook it. Cook it for your friends, cook it for yourself, cook it for anybody who eats, because food is really important. We all need nutritious food, and eating out all the time is gonna wreck our bodies. I know sometimes our schedules, how busy we are, does not give us the time to cook, but again, I would say figure out a way to plan your meals. At the end of the day, if you really take your health seriously, you will learn to cook. You don't have to be like a master chef or anything like that. You just need to be able to feed yourself and feed yourself good, nutritious food. And I think that's the best way to handle it. That's all I'm going to answer today because we're running out of time. If you have any more questions about living alone, if you have any more questions about what I shared in this video, please don't hesitate to comment down below, or if you don't want your comment to be public, DM me directly on Instagram so that I can answer your question either through another video or just directly, because I want to be helpful in whatever way I can. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next week. I'm rambling, dude. I'm so rambling. Okay. Kind of, what do you call that? That's something. And I think this is already